Deputy Whip. The man I'm now going to introduce you to is the Chief Whip, ladies and gentlemen, and rightly so, because this is a man I always describe as Stuart Agnew VC, one of the bravest frontline warriors of our movement for many years, and a man that will always be out there leading from the front with his sword drawn, and a tremendous expert in the damage that the UU is doing to our agriculture and the benefit that we can get from leaving for our farmers. So, ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to Stuart Agnew.
Good afternoon, everybody. And this is a true story because it's only 18 hours old. But last night I was speaking in Sutton Coldfield at a dinner, West Midlands dinner there. I was very impressed with the candidates and the branch. And afterwards I went to a hotel 4 or 5 miles away. And it was one of these Premier Inns, or whatever they're called, a motel. I went in and checked in, and the receptionist was right next to the bar. And after I checked in, I said to the receptionist, could I have a drink? Is the bar open? He said, yes. I said, I'd love to have a brandy with a tiny little drop of water in it. Can you get me one of those? Which he did. And I then said, how much is that? And he said, oh, that's on me, mate, or however they speak in the West Midlands. And I thought, well, what's all this about? And he said, well, you're UKIP, aren't you? That really happened. So, the Southwest have been behaving very well, actually, as far as I'm concerned. I have been putting some agricultural communications out to the ROs in all the different regions, asking them to get them through to the rural candidates. And the Southwest have done this in an exemplary fashion. A number of people have come up to me today and said, thank you very much for doing this. Not all regions have behaved quite so efficiently, so well done, Southwest. Now, Ray did say that, and he's quite right, that the Common Fisheries Policy was probably a bigger disaster than the CAP. For this reason, that from the day they started to implement the Common Fisheries Policy, it hit fishermen very hard indeed. But for the first 12 years, 1972 to 1984, the agricultural policy, they actually threw money at farmers. And many farmers can't really forget that, although the situation started to change in 1984 when they imposed milk quotas and when we had a record harvest. From 84 to the present day, they've been getting their money every year, but regulation has been biting deeper and deeper and deeper. But they are in the following mindset. That, well, yes, it's difficult, there are problems, and yes, they agree with what UKIP says, but as far as agriculture goes, the devil they know is better than the devil they don't, and they're very reluctant, resistant to change, they're frightened. What I've been trying to impress on them is what is coming down the tracks from the CAP to agriculture in the next few years, and there are a number of headings here, and I'm just going to go through them and then give the UKIP alternative. Well, the first, of course, is that farmers are paid a flat rate per hectare, but it's in euros. Now, I don't expect any of you to sob and shed tears for me when I tell you my MEP salary has crashed in this last 6 months, but the problem is the euro's got a lot weaker, and farmers are paid in euros. That has to buy pounds. A euro a year ago bought 85 or 86 pence, now it's only buying 72. The farmers, their rate is decided on the last working day in September, and it's going to be bad. It was worse last year than the year before, and it's going to be worse this year than last year, and that will hit their incomes actually very hard indeed. Why is this happening? Because the European Central Bank have decided that they're going to quantitative easing, they're going to print money, not just millions of euros, not just hundreds of millions of euros, not just billions of euros, not just hundreds of billions of euros, but trillions of euros. And my old friend Robert Mugabe, from what used to be called Rhodesia, he will tell you what happens when you print money to that degree. It devalues it. And this is not just a transient event. We're going to see this settle in, and it could get worse. It could go down to 60. That's very bad news for farmers. Added to that, the other pressure on the euro is the uncertainty in Greece. What can UKIP do about it? Well, we're going to have a single farm payment system, but we will pay in pounds per acre, and you will get pounds per acre. It will be £80 per acre. That will vary with the land grades. And it will be a netted off. It's about what they've been getting recently, but actually it's going to be more because of the way this euro is devalued. So please emphasise that. They are paid in devaluing euros at the moment. We will pay in pounds an acre. All they need to do for this is to satisfy an environmental scheme which isn't particularly onerous. The next thing that's really coming down the tracks, and is going to be a huge problem for arable farmers, is that the EU want to alter the way they assess the safety of pesticides. Now, some of you may say pesticides are wicked and evil and toxic, but I can assure you that if we cannot keep the weeds out of our crops, if we cannot stop them getting plastered with funguses, if we cannot keep the insects off them that dehydrate them and put in viruses, we will get very poor harvests. And we need agrochemicals in order to produce enough food for you to eat. It is as simple as that. The population of this country is great enough that we cannot farm organically. We can't feed you like that. Now, this is going to have a huge impact, because at least half of the active ingredients that the industry is using at the moment are going to be outlawed, basically, on this hazard basis. They're going to look at these things from the hazard point of view. Now, petrol is a hazard, but we feel that the risk involved in using it is worth taking because it is so useful to us. So it can only be sold from petrol pumps that are deep under the ground and regulated premises, etc. And we consider that risk is worth taking. This is the attitude that we always took to assessing pesticides in this country when we had the power to do so. We did it on the risk basis. Was the risk in using the hazard in that material, was it worth taking? If it wasn't, we didn't allow the chemical to be used. If we felt it was then graded into certain levels of toxicity, and depending on how strong they were, you had to dress up in a spacesuit, etc., etc. Under the hazard basis, which the EU want, if it's got something in it that can be described as a hazard, they won't want it used. And let's look at the organic blueberry, shall we? The organic blueberry has got 65 chemicals in it. 13 of them would be classed as hazardous by the EU, and 5 as toxic. Now, I got that from my great friend Roger Helmer, MEP, and it's absolutely true. You know, these things are all around us, but in tiny, tiny quantities. So if that's the status of an organic blueberry, God help an agrochemical. So we are going to lose an awful lot. What's going to happen is that our farmers won't be able to use these things, will have low yields, or they won't grow certain vegetable crops at all. We will then import these from other third countries beyond the European Union, which have been treated with these products. What are UKIP going to do? Well, we will, of course, go back to the old British system of assessing these on a risk basis. We are quite competent at doing it. The Health and Safety Executive will tell you that it's not agrochemicals that cause injuries and accidents on farms, it's falling off heights and getting snaffled up in a PTO shaft. The EU are going down the wrong street here, and UKIP will certainly correct it. Now we've got their extraordinary attitude to climate change and global warming, etc. They say that if farmers change the way they farm, the world's weather will improve. This is the idea. Apparently our industry has got to play its part in changing and improving the world's weather. They say that industry in general, and farming comes into that, are emitting too much CO2 and emitting too much methane. So they have said, and I've been to a committee meeting in Brussels where they have demonstrated this, oh, well, all you need to do is look at this tractor on the screen here, tractor pulling a cultivator. What's different about it? Well, there's a flexible steel pipe going from the exhaust pipe of the tractor over the cab of the tractor, down through a manifold, and a little air pipe behind every single cultivator tine to bury the exhaust gases. They call it sequestering carbon, or some ridiculous term like that. And all the MEPs, when they saw that, they clapped. Oh, what a wonderful idea that was, except for this one, who happens to be a practical farmer and knows that if you pump a warm gas into cold soil, all it does is start to bubble back out again, and certainly if you do a subsequent cultivation, it will all come back out again. But of course, crucially, the effort involved in pumping that gas down under the ground will use far more fuel than you normally would, so it's an absolute shooting yourself in the foot. Methane is actually, let's just lighten us up a little bit because it has to be. Methane. Methane apparently is a terribly bad greenhouse gas. Yes, there is 0.00004% of it in the atmosphere, and of course the world 400 years ago teemed with wild ruminants of the buffalo and the bison and the deer and the antelope of the Great Plains of America and Asia and Africa. They were all ruminants doing what ruminants do. But because that number has slowly dwindled and morphed into a domestic ruminant population. Suddenly this is a construct of modern farming, all this methane emission, and we've got to do something about it. And they say, well, in order to stop your cows and sheep emitting more methane, you must feed them less hay, grass, silage, and more cereals and concentrate. And again, all the MEPs clap, what a wonderful idea. Well, most of us in farming know that ruminants are appallingly bad converters. You shouldn't feed them cereals and concentrates because they convert them at 9 to 1 instead of a poultry which is 2 to 1. It's too expensive to do it, but nevertheless, that is what they recommend. And of course, these are things that eat grass. We can't eat grass, but they turn grass into meat and milk that we can consume. So just imagine the poor farmer who's due for an inspection. 1 in 100 get an inspection every year for their single farm payment. And this farmer is told he's going to be the one who's going to be inspected. But he's particularly unlucky, because not only is he going to be inspected, but the EU inspector is going to inspect his inspector while his inspector is inspecting his farm. 1 in 10,000 chance of that. So there they go, into the building, the cows are all there in their cubicles, and the EU inspector comes along with his methane meter, and the farmer stands there with his fingers crossed, his eyes closed, and he says, Daisy, Daisy, please don't fart. But of course, she does, because that's what Daisy does, and all hell lets loose. Out comes the clipboard, slap on the non-compliance sheet, fill in the form, penalty points, penalty points, penalty points, lack of subsidy. Well, he does not want to get into that situation, and so he will keep fewer animals. Where are we going with that? And for what's UKIP's solution? Repeal the Climate Change Act and have done with it. Now the next problem we have, with these NVZ rules, the EU halved the maximum level, safe level of nitrate in water. There is nitrogen in the air, we breathe the air. There is nitrogen in water, we drink water. The question is, what level is safe? And the EU have set a ridiculously low target, which we in the east of England find very, very hard to adhere to. And if they keep twisting the screw on us, we're going to be using less and less fertiliser, getting less and less optimum yields. It's going to go downhill badly, and that's not what farmers want, and it's not what you want, who produce the food that we give you. What's UKIP going to do? We don't want round numbers pulled out of a hat. We want science to have a really good look at this. And if we can get that level of 50 back up to the 100 that our British scientists said was safe, 50, 60, 70, 80, then so be it. But science will have to make a decision. We will stand back and let them make that decision, but we will then support it. The EU has got bad news for organic farmers, actually very bad news. Split holdings are no longer going to be allowed. Now, of course, in the EU, holdings are very small, and a farm of 15 acres is quite common. Well, they say that should all be organic, not part of it. Here, our farms 300, 400, 500, 1,000 acres. Putting all that into organic, which some of my friends and colleagues have over the east of England, is a huge risk when the bottom falls out of the organic market, as it did over the last few years because of the recession. So for them, they're going to have to be told, you've got to double or quits. Either all your farm is in organic or none of it is. And they're going to go down the quit route. They simply can't take the risk of having all of it in organic, such a big acreage, and when the market isn't there. You cannot have the cost of organic farming and then have to sell the product at ordinary prices. It doesn't add up. They also want to insist that the organic farmers use organic seed. Well, this is a very finite supply, and if they can't get it, it means either they have to plant ordinary seeds, so they lose their organic status for years, or they leave the land fallow. Both are highly unsatisfactory alternatives. What are UKIP going to do? We're going to give them a 25% premium on our £80 an acre. We value organic farming for two reasons. The first is that so much of our countryside in the south and east is farmed on two crops, oilseed rape and wheat, and they are managed respectively in very similar ways, meaning that the flora and fauna that tolerates that management situation becomes dominant and the countryside becomes a bit black and white or monochrome. The occasional organic farm around the place, managed very differently, brings you in biodiversity, and this is very desirable. The other reason we want to support them is because they are constantly researching biological measures to control problems. They may well come up with something that we can all use, so we must keep that sector going, because you've no idea what solutions they may find. Another thing that's coming down the track, we in our industry agriculture have used the grain futures market for many, many years. This works well. You need three participants. You need those who produce the commodity, those who consume it, and some speculators to set prices and get the whole thing going. It's worked in cereals in this country. The EU want to legislate on that, make that whole market far more difficult to operate in, and that's going to make life much more difficult for grain farmers. But crucially, we want to get a futures up for the dairy, for milk powder, so they can have a bit more long-term security and can sell ahead, etc. And this MIFID, it's an acronym, MIFID, is going to make that far more difficult to achieve. Then, of course, we've got the trading arrangements that are going on behind our backs, as it were, Mercosur and TTIP. Mercosur, 4 countries in South America. You can kiss goodbye to the suckle beef industry in the southwest if Mercosur goes ahead, and there is nothing our politicians can do because it's being negotiated by somebody else. TTIP is a giant version of Mercosur, and I'm a free-range egg producer, okay, and TTIP is going to affect me for the following reason. Britain is in the European Union, but the free-range egg industry is very much a British thing. Half our production, or just over, is free-range. In the rest of the European Union, it's pretty well non-existent. They just don't think about it. Their attitudes to welfare are very different. Under our free-range egg standards, and this is it's a consumer-driven industry, we are told as free-range egg producers, your eggs must have a brown shell, and they must not be washed. Over the water in America, what's the definition there? A free-range egg must have a white shell, and a free-range egg must be washed and re-waxed. Now, who's going to win that competition between little Britain against the EU and the rest of America? No contest, really, isn't it? What could be the impact for me? I will be told I've got to have a breed of hen that produces white eggs. Those white eggs go into a supermarket. Consumers see a white egg and think it's from a cage. Meanwhile, the snazzy Romanian battery cage producer, because they've still got them there, believe me, he buys a hen that gives a brown egg. They're sold over here. The consumers think, oh, brown egg, free range, I'll buy that. You can see the problems ahead, can't you? How am I doing for time? I finished. I'm very sorry. Right. I'm sorry. Thank you for giving me the answer.